Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah and this is my granny era. So this is my weekly wrap up. I'm going to share with you guys the books that I've been reading this week. Like I said in my last video, we have been so sick around here, which has actually lent to a lot of reading time. So I guess that's a good part about being sick. But I'm ready to be done now. It's been over 2 weeks. Still have my cough hanging around, but other than that, doing pretty good. But I have got a lot of reading done. So the first thing that I finished this week was Mary Shelley's The Last Man. Now, it was really hard for me actually to rate this book because on one hand, I want to give her a ton of credit for just being so well read, for one thing. This book really made me think about how important it is that we read classical literature. Fiction and nonfiction books from the ancient times and the classical period, the, Greeks and Romans and all the things that they were writing and all the things that they were thinking about. There are so many allusions to classical works in all of the, what we now call classics, literature from, 17th, 18th, 19th century especially. It's so important that we know that ancient history so that we can understand all of these allusions. A lot of alluding to mythology, just stories that she knew well because she was well read. And however she was educated, I don't know, but she was well educated for sure, whether that was a self-education or, if she had teachers or whatever. But I want to give her credit for that. I want to give her credit for a interesting concept, but the parts that are making it difficult for me are these. For one thing, this is the story of basically the annihilation of the human race due to a plague. So the book starts out in the early 2000s. I think it's like 2074 or something is when the book starts. And the narrator goes back to his childhood and tells, his whole story of growing up or whatever. So the earliest that the events of this book take place would have been in the 2040s sometime. And it tells the story all the way up through, I think it's the year 2100 is when the Earth is left with one remaining human. And in all of that time, I think that Mary Shelley could have been so creative. She could have thought of so many weird futuristic things, so many interesting, concepts about what she thinks that our time may have been like. And what she comes up with is one reference to a flying machine, which is a hot air balloon with feathers. And that's it. That's all. They get around in that just a couple of times. They take that flying machine. And the rest of the time, they're in, horses and carriages and all the stuff that they would have taken in Regency era. She doesn't imagine any kind of land mobile besides what they have. She does not imagine futuristic clothing, technologies. I mean, she says technology, was greater or something. I mean, she just puts that out there. Well, duh. But that is to be assumed, right, by the reader if they're reading something that is supposedly taking place a couple hundred years in the future. So she doesn't ever go into those technologies. She doesn't imagine any kind of inventions. She doesn't imagine any kind of a change in, attitudes about much at all, really. So if she didn't tell you it was in the future, you wouldn't know it was in the future. But I think she could have done a lot with that, and she didn't for whatever reason. So that made it kind of a letdown. When you pick up a book that's, clearly futuristic, you assume that it's going to talk about some sort of philosophies for the future. The governmental system, she talks about England being a republic ruled by the elite. And, but the guy's a Lord Protector, and I don't know, it's not much different from what they had at the time anyway, and what they had in the past. So I don't know. The futuristic part of it, there wasn't much to that. There are a lot of unanswered questions and plot holes. I mean, this little company of people are traveling all over the UK and Europe, and they never encounter a dead body. It gets to the point where there's just 4 people left, and just a couple more people left, and then just 1 person left, and they never encounter a dead body anywhere ever. It's never mentioned. So I would say, oh, it's just the times, but if you're Frankenstein is pretty gory in places. So I don't know. She just never mentions any bodies anywhere, even if the whole world is supposed to have been wiped out by plague. So it doesn't give you much to imagine. The language is super flowery, super poetic, and way too wordy. This book is way too long for what it is. Very repetitive. I did not enjoy it. I gave it 2 stars. Again, I want to give her credit for her level of intelligence, her level of, education, and her concept. But what she did with it could have been so much more. Especially after reading Frankenstein, which I'll get to that in a little bit. The creativity that is shown in Frankenstein as opposed to what is shown in this book written years later, it surprises me. So the book, I think, is a real heavy kind of allegorical tale of her own life, sorrow, struggle, loss. She, at this point of writing this, she had lost her husband and their friends. She had gone back to England all by herself, and she was feeling like the last person on earth. The way of life that they had lived was no longer, available to her, and she was probably feeling and I can imagine that's probably how a lot of people feel when they're the last one, right? You're the last of a sibling group. All your siblings have passed away, or you're the last of a friend group or whatever. So it's relatable in that way. She takes it to some very poetic extremes to the point of just really being obnoxious. So I can't necessarily, I don't know. I mean, I can recommend it for what it is, but I can't recommend it as really great reading. Does that make sense? I think you should read it, but I don't think you should have high expectations. All right, so that was my first Feb Regency read for this month. And then I also talked about reading Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. That is the read for Anne's event for the Jane Austen birthday event. It's her February read for that. But I did read it in August. And so I was thinking about rereading, but after I went back and thought about it, I was just, I don't know. I got kind of annoyed with it when I read it in August. And I'm going to talk about that more on my next video, which is going to be a tag video. I'm going to talk about Sense and Sensibility a little bit in that one. It's going to be the Valentine's Day tag. So if you guys want to hear my thoughts on that, you can check that out. But I decided not to read it after all. Like I said, I just read it 6 months ago. And so I'm going to skip that. But anyway, that is my first Feb Regency read. And then for Holmes is Where the Heart Is, we are reading stuff about Sherlock Holmes, right, by Conan Doyle. Or just things about Conan Doyle too. But I read A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is my second Sherlock Holmes. This one is the first in the series. This tells the beginning story of how Sherlock Holmes and Watson meet. And I did enjoy this. I was a little thrown off. The story is told in 2 parts. And so you get the story and the mystery and the solving of it. Then part 2 is the whole backstory. So you know why the guy did what he did, right? So at the end of part 1, you know who did it, but you have no idea who that person is and how any of these people are related to one another. And so then in part 2, you get that whole backstory. It was an interesting way to do it. I don't know how many more of his stories are done that way. The only other one I've read is Hound of the Baskervilles, and it wasn't written that way. But it was an interesting way to do it, and I enjoyed it. So it takes you all over the place. You're in London at the first part, and then you are in Utah with the Mormons on part 2. And that was interesting and funny, kind of. The Mormons aren't painted in a very good light, we'll just say that. And And there's a portion in part 2 where a group of people leave the Utah Valley and they head up into the mountains out of Salt Lake City. And like, I know that way, like if you're headed towards Denver. And so like, I'm imagining in my head, that whole trip, right? And so the different places that they made stops, like I'm imagining they would have stopped at like this place where I stop or whatever on that trip. So that was kind of fun just to kind of have that picture in my head of that whole area. My brother lived in the Salt Lake City area for a while, and we'd go visit him, and sometimes that's the way I take when I go visit my mom in Oregon. But anyway, so I enjoyed studying Scarlet. It was a fun, quick little mystery read, and I don't know if I'll pick up any more Sherlock Holmes mysteries this month, but I'll definitely be looking for more for the future. All right, and the next up, I read The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. And this was surprisingly wonderful. I loved this story. I have had a beef with Mark Twain for a long time, and I have to apologize now because I think that this was a fantastic story. It was so funny. The sense of humor was just really great. But there were like some serious parts in there, some emotional parts. And it was just fantastic in all the ways. I love the story so much. So it's a pretty well-known story, right? A pauper and a prince trade places, and the pauper is learning how to be a prince while the prince is finding out what it's like to have to live on the outside and, just fend for yourself and how dangerous it is. And both of them try to convince the people around them that they are not who they are thought to be. The pauper gives up on that pretty quickly and just sort of indulges in prince life. But the prince on the outside, he never gives up his stance that he is the prince and eventually the rightful king, because Henry VIII does die, and then Edward is moved up, to being the king. So there was some really funny parts too. I just the humor, I don't know. I thought it was kind of funny how Mark Twain just really made kind of a big deal about some of the sillinesses that we read about or maybe even are just imagined within the English court. At one point, he's talking about how it's time for the prince or the, fake prince to be dressed. And it says, "The weighty business of dressing began, and one courtier after another knelt and paid his court, and offered to the little king his condolences upon his heavy loss, while the dressing proceeded. In the beginning, a shirt was taken up by the chief equerry in waiting, who passed it to the first lord of the buckhounds, who passed it to the second gentleman of the bedchamber, who passed it to the head ranger of the Windsor Forest, who passed it to the third groom of the stole, who passed it to the chancellor royal of the Duchy of Lancaster, who passed it to the master of the wardrobe, who passed it to Norrie, king at arms, who passed it to the constable of the Tower, who passed it to the chief steward of the household, who passed it to the hereditary grand diaperer, who passed it to the Lord Admiral of England, who passed it to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who passed it to the first lord of the bedchamber, who took what was left of it and put it on Tom. Poor little wondering chap, it reminded him of passing buckets at a fire." So just making fun of the fact that, the royals at one point in history maybe would have had all of these royal, sock putter honors and, toenail clippers and whatever, just people to do all these silly royal duties. Obviously, there wasn't this entire, assembly line to get the boy dressed for the day, but it was funny. And then they did the same thing with his stockings, his hose. But once it got all the way down the line, they realized that there was a hole, and so they had to pass it all the way back again. And so all these people are named again and again and again as they're passing his clothes back and forth, and it's pretty silly. But the story ended well. It was very satisfying. I'm just really glad that I read this. It was a surprising 5-star read for me, for sure. Now, those are the 3 books that I finished this week. I am also currently reading... what's receipts of this I should take care of. Whoops. I am currently reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'm just about done with it. I'll be done with it here in a few minutes. And I have to give an apology. So I have been saying some pretty negative things about Frankenstein for a while based on my remembrances of reading it. And so this month I said it is Feb Regency and Frankenstein fits perfectly. I'm already reading some other things by Mary Shelley. I might as well read Frankenstein again with fresh eyes. And so I have. And I think reading The Last Man has really helped, for one thing, helped me appreciate this because the story of Frankenstein, even in itself, is super wordy. Even in itself could have been a lot shorter than it is. But if so, it just would have been teeny tiny, right? Because it's only like 160 pages anyway. But it's nowhere near the level of obnoxious wordiness as The Last Man. So, and she wrote the Frankenstein first, right? So I guess I have to give her credit because I used to say how just flowery and just wordy, just so repetitive. I don't know. Those are the words I keep using, right? I'm being wordy and repetitive, but those were my complaints about Frankenstein. I'm like, it's just not a concise story. It's just kind of all over the place. But then I read The Last Man, and I mean, there's way more going on in Frankenstein at 166 pages than there ever is in The Last Man at almost 500 pages. So I owe Mary Shelley an apology. I apologize, Mary Shelley. I am actually enjoying the story of Frankenstein. I have kind of been changing my point of view on it, really, and on the story that I believe this is telling, compared to how I used to feel about it. And I don't know why that is. Maybe I understand the story better now, or maybe, I don't know. But when I finish it, I'll write out some notes and then I'll tell you guys next week kind of what I'm thinking on that. But that's what I'm reading. Gonna finish tonight. I've also been doing the Arabian Nights read along, 1001 Nights. And this is volume 1. There's 3 volumes this size. And we're reading this for a year and a half. There's a group of people that are reading this. We read just a portion of nights each month, all the way until June 2026. So I will put a link in the description box for one of the participants who has the schedule on his video description. You guys can check out Randy Ray's video there. So that's where I've heard about it. But there is a schedule. And so for February, we're reading the introduction and the first 22 nights. Now, I'm a little behind. Yeah, I'm pretty behind. But that's okay because I'm reading this in chunks rather than just one story per night. I don't know, I do better that way. I kind of hold my attention. So I'll still get all my reading and it's just not like one story a night, right? And that's fine. You do it however you want to do it. But basically, there's this king and he has this habit, I don't know, tradition, whatever, of bringing in a maiden from the village each night, spending the night with her and killing her in the morning. And so pretty soon, a village maiden decides that she's going to try to stop this, save herself and any future maidens. So she starts telling the guy stories. And every night she tells him a story. And then she, I guess, is supposed to be leaving it on a cliffhanger. It's not really a cliffhanger. It's more like she wraps it up and then she says, but if you thought that was a good story, wait till tomorrow night because I have an even better story. So it's kind of making him, right, be anticipating, well, I want to hear that next story. So he doesn't kill her. So we'll see. I don't know what happens. I don't know if she gets through all 1001 of them. I'm assuming she does, but we'll find out what happens. But so far, it's been interesting and sort of fun. And, you know, like we're rooting for the girl, of course. Like we don't want her to get knocked off, right? All right. And then the other thing I've been reading through is The Fires of Vesuvius by Mary Beard. And this I'm reading for Historathon Q1. And I'll probably just kind of slowly read it over the month. Sort of enjoying it. Like I'm learning some stuff, but I'm finding that I don't prefer Mary Beard as a storyteller. I read, what did I read? Confronting the Classics from her last year at Historathon Quarter 1. And I didn't like just her as a, historian. And I don't prefer this storytelling voice either. I just think she's just kind of rude. She's just kind of rude and a little pretentious. And I don't know. Some people would say, well, she is a great historian who knows so much, so that's okay. I don't think so. I don't think it's okay. It's pretentiousness is annoying no matter who you are and what you know. So I don't know. I don't prefer her as like her voice, but the information is interesting, and there's a lot of photographs and drawings and things to kind of help you imagine things in your head, and I am enjoying the story, but I don't know. I don't know that I'll seek her out, but if I come across something of hers again in the future, sure, I might read it. But that's it. That is my reading for this week. Let me know what you guys have been reading, and if you've read any of the stuff that I read, what you think about it. Hope everybody's having a good day. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.